Hey, welcome back. Now that we've talked about the divisions of the nervous system and talked about how the autonomic nervous system is kind of our automatic nervous system for involuntary motor functions such as contraction of smooth muscles, some of the regulation of our cardiac muscle, as well as secretion of glands, we're going to talk about the one of the two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system. So this one is often known as your fight or flight. Why? This is the part of your nervous system that is triggered if something is wrong, like oh my gosh, there's something horrible or some type of emergency happening, and it's going to optimize your body for intense action. Either you're going to have to run away or you're going to have to fight, but it's going to optimize you to be able to do a whole lot of muscular actions really quickly. So it's going to dilate your pupils to improve your vision. It's going to increase your circulation by getting your heart pumping harder and more quickly so that you can send more blood, more oxygen, more glucose to your muscles, which are going to need it because you're doing all this intense activity. It's going to open up your lungs to make it easier to get oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. It's going to cause your liver to release the storage form of glucose so that there's going to be more glucose going out into your bloodstream to fuel those muscles. And it's going to inhibit your digestive and excretory functions. Excretory functions are like urination and defecation. Now is not the time, right? We are too busy. We don't want to spend precious body energy on these functions right now. That can wait till later. We're also going to start sweating preemptively because we're anticipating we're going to get hot because we're going to be running or fighting. So we're going to start sweating right away. Not always helpful when it's not something that you're going to physically respond to, right? If it's just like somebody broke up with you or you're coming in for a final exam, sweating is not helpful. But anyway, that's what our sympathetic nervous system is going to do for us. It is activated in response to some sort of a perceived threat. Now, somebody breaks up with you, or you're going for a final exam, or as a cop car pulls up behind you, right? Those are emotional responses, right? So you're like, oh no, this bad thing is going to happen. And so your amygdala, which you might remember from the unit on olfaction, it's one of the places that receives direct input from your olfactory system and is important for our emotions and regulation of emotions. So the amygdala, if it's an emotional threat, is going to sound the alarm. But now, interestingly, physical problems can do it too. So those chemoreceptors, the central ones, the peripheral ones in the carotid and the aortic bodies, if there's like, oh my gosh, we have really high pH levels, or we have other types of receptors like baroreceptors, and like, oh no, our blood pressure is too low. There are, if our blood glucose gets too low, there are other things besides, emotional life events that can trigger the system. But we'll use the example of something scary that you have to run away from. But the thing they all have in common is that then it's going to signal the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is really the boss here. So our hypothalamus that we haven't talked a whole lot about yet, we keep touching on it here and there. So the hypothalamus is going to activate the sympathetic nervous system. It's the boss. So I want to talk a little bit about how the anatomy is structured. So remember when we did somatosensory system and we had first order, second order, and third order neurons, and we did somatic motor system and we had upper motor neurons and lower motor neurons. Well, in the autonomic nervous system, both sympathetic and parasympathetic, actually, we have a 2-neuron system. And they synapse in a ganglion because they synapse out in the peripheral nervous system. So you have a preganglionic neuron whose cell body sits in this central nervous system. So I will tell you it's going to be brainstem or spinal cord for the autonomic nervous system. And its axon is then going to travel out to a ganglion somewhere out in the peripheral nervous system where it is going to synapse, right? So here's our synapse with the cell body of a postganglionic neuron, which is then going to send its axon out to whatever the effector is. The effector is the organ that you're going to have do the thing and make the effect happen. So whether it's glands or different types of involuntary muscle, those are your effectors. So we have a 2-neuron system. We call this first one the preganglionic neuron over here because it's the one that you see before the ganglion. And then this one is called the postganglionic neuron, which is kind of weird because it's like, well, it's sitting in the ganglion. So maybe it's the intra and postganglionic neuron. But anyway, they didn't ask me. So that is the terminology here. So instead of like upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron, we have preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. Okay. So where are they? So in the case of the sympathetic nervous system, and I'm just going to highlight so that you don't get too messed up, especially when you go back to study between sympathetic and parasympathetic. All the sympathetic nervous system ones are going to have this little running man because he's like running for his life. Okay, so the preganglionic neuron, so that's kind of our upper motor neuron, so to speak, for the sympathetic nervous system are in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. So you can see it's like the tiniest cell body ever. So I'm going to make it bigger. Right? It's sitting here in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. And it's located in, we have these preganglionic neurons for the sympathetic system in both the thoracic and the lumbar regions of the spinal cord. They are then going to send their axons out through the ventral root. These are motor neurons, right? They're just visceral motor neurons. So through the ventral root, and then they're gonna like take a weird little exit and they're gonna go to a ganglia. So they're gonna go through that ventral root and they're gonna reach a sympathetic ganglion, which could be in one of 2 potential places for the most part. Let's take a look at that on the next slide. Okay, where are these sympathetic ganglia? So many of them are located in what is called the sympathetic chain. So I'm going to show you where that is. Hopefully this animation works appropriately. So on the left side here, we have a picture of a human body. We've removed the anterior thoracic and abdominal walls, so we're seeing the viscera inside. So now what we're going to do is we're going to remove all those guts, like we're, field dressing a deer. We're going to take all those organs out and see what's on the inside, right? In the back there. Ta-da! This is what you're going to see. So we've got, let me find a color that might show up. Let's try blue. So here's the posterior ribs, right? So we're like inside the body. We're looking inside at the back of the rib cage there. This is your esophagus here running up and down, and you can see your trachea, your bronchi. I'm going to switch to yellow. Maybe that's going to show it better. On either side of the spine, see these guys? This is your sympathetic chain. There's all these ganglia where we're going to find those postganglionic neurons. Now, we also have other ganglia. So we have either they're in the sympathetic chain. Where's my cursor? You cursor. All right, so either in the sympathetic chain or they're just outside this area in something called prevertebral ganglia. I'm not going to make you kind of learn where those are. But so in these sympathetic ganglia now, this is where we're going to have the synapse between the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. And the neurotransmitter that they're going to release is acetylcholine. For like, hey, that's a friend of ours. We know that motor neurons like to release acetylcholine, right? Just like in the neuromuscular junction for skeletal muscle here, but this is in a synapse for the one neuron to another. And the types of receptors, our old friend, nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, the NATRs. There they are, yet again. Okay, so ganglia, we're going to have our synapse with the postganglionic neuron. So then that's just a reminder, right? This is what's happening. And then that postganglionic axon has to travel all the way to wherever the effector organ is. So what we see here in the diagram on the left is a schematic of, you can see we've got our spinal cord, thoracic and lumbar spinal cord, and you can see those little orange dots. Those are the cell bodies of our preganglionic neurons. And then they send their axon out where it's going to synapse either in the sympathetic chain or in some of these other ganglia with the postganglionic neuron, which is then represented in green here. You can see then the postganglionic axons are going to travel. Sometimes they have to go really, really far, like to get up to the eye, really, really far to get to the heart or the liver, really, really far to get to the intestines. So what we see is that the postganglionic axon in the sympathetic nervous system is usually quite long because the ganglia was very close to the spinal cord, so they have a ways to go. And interestingly, when it gets there, it doesn't release acetylcholine. It releases norepinephrine. Now, another name for norepinephrine is noradrenaline. They mean the same thing. And you've maybe heard of adrenaline. So adrenaline and noradrenaline, which is the same thing as epinephrine and norepinephrine, they're very close to each other, right? And so like adrenaline, right? When you're really revved up, haha, yes, that's your sympathetic nervous system. So this is that norepinephrine being released at the effector organs. So here is just another diagram. I want to show you the same thing. So if it's an emotional stressor, right, then the amygdala is going to notify the hypothalamus, which is going to send signals down to the preganglionic neurons, which are living in the spinal cord. They're going to send their axon out to the ganglia, which are in the sympathetic chain or those other ganglia, and synapse are going to release acetylcholine, synapse with the postganglionic neuron, whose cell body is in the ganglion, which is then going to send its axon out to the organ, and it's going to use norepinephrine as its neurotransmitter. And you can see all the different organs here that it's talking to: the eye, the salivary glands, the heart, the lungs, liver, gallbladder, stomach, intestines, right? We're talking to all these inner parts of our body through this system. So what are they doing? Well, it depends on the organ. In the case of the eye, remember we said it's going to dilate the pupil. So it's actually going to send fibers through and that are going to help dilate the pupil. For the heart, it's going to increase the heart rate, the frequency at which the heart beats, right? It's going to increase the pulse is another way of saying that, as well as the force of contraction. So when the heart contracts, it's going to contract more forcefully. It's going to beat harder so it can pump more blood more quickly. And then with your blood vessels, interestingly, it's going to constrict a lot of them, which will increase your blood pressure. And increase the blood pressure allows you to increase the pressure in the tube, right? So you can deliver blood more quickly to the places where you want it to go. And it's going to divert blood away from your intestines and your skin, because they're not so important right here in the moment. We need to supply our blood vessels, so we're going to get really intense with where we're sending blood, and our overall blood pressure is going to go up quite significantly. In the lungs, we're going to open up the air tubes. So believe it or not, the bronchi or the air tubes in lung have smooth muscle in their walls, and when it contracts, they constrict, and this is going to dilate them. It's going to relax the muscle and open them up. If you've ever used a short-acting, an emergency inhaler, a puffer for asthma that contained a medicine called albuterol. Albuterol acts on the lungs in this very similar way to the sympathetic nervous system. It is chemically similar to the norepinephrine that's released, which if you're like, oh, so that's why sometimes then my heart feels like it's beating really hard. Yeah, right? It's using the same kind of chemicals. And then in your digestive system, it's going to decrease digestive activity. Everything from drying up your salivary glands, like now is not the time to be mouth-watering. And so a lot of times when you get nervous, for example, you get that dry mouth. That's why. And it's going to decrease activity in your intestines. Now is not the time to break down the Hot Pocket that you had for lunch. It's just going to have to wait till later. It's also going to relax your bladder muscles so that you do not urinate, which is why sometimes if you have to give a urine test for something and you're kind of nervous and sometimes you actually have to pee in front of somebody if it's a drug test and it's really uncomfortable, it's hard to go because your sympathetic nervous system interferes with your ability to urinate. And as I mentioned before, it's going to increase sweating, particularly in the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet and under your arms particularly. So these are going to be all of the effects on the organs that we see from the sympathetic nervous system being activated. What's interesting about the sympathetic nervous system is it's also going to stimulate the adrenal gland, which is part of your endocrine system, your hormonal system. So like what? Okay, so the adrenal glands sit, you have two of them, one on each side. They sit right on top of the kidneys. They don't have a lot to do with the kidneys. They're separate organs, but that happens to be where they hang out. So they are called adrenal glands because ad means toward and renal means kidney. Anyway, they have this middle part, which is called the adrenal medulla. Now, the adrenal glands in general produce a whole variety of different types of hormones, and different parts of the adrenal gland, whether it's the cortex or the medulla, make different hormones. So let's talk about what's going to happen with the sympathetic nervous system and the adrenal gland. So it's specifically going to activate the adrenal medulla. And the way it does this is kind of weird. So the preganglionic neuron, remember, in the lateral horn of the spinal cord in the thoracic or lumbar spinal cord, it's going to send its axon out the ventral root, and then it's going to do this weird thing and loop around and go on these weird places. So it's going to go all the way out to the adrenal medulla. Now, normally, remember, in the sympathetic nervous system, you would have a ganglion very close to the spinal cord. Not so in this one example. So it's going to go all the way out. That preganglionic neuron's axon is going to go all the way out to the adrenal medulla. And then it's going to synapse with a cell that is like technically kind of your postganglionic neuron, but it's also really weird and bizarre and has like evolved to do strange things. And so it's called a chromaffin cell. And that cell is going to release epinephrine and norepinephrine, but not into a synapse. It's going to release it into the bloodstream. So what's interesting about epinephrine and norepinephrine is they can be used as neurotransmitters in a synapse, but they can also be secreted in the bloodstream and act as hormones on the whole body. So it's this weird connection between our nervous system and our endocrine system. Kind of cool. So why bother doing this, right? We already sent our nervous system signals to all of these organs. Why do we also have to send epinephrine and norepinephrine through the bloodstream? So when we look at the body's signaling mechanisms in general, the nervous system is really good for being very quick, but it tends to be very quick on and quick off, right? And if you want to keep sending the signal, you have to keep sending signals, right? And then doing the whole thing where you reestablish your membrane potential and lots of sodium, potassium, ATPase to make that keep happening, right? And it's just going to go to specific places. Whereas the endocrine system, now you have a hormone that goes through the whole bloodstream to the entire body, and it tends to hang around longer. So it tends to be longer lasting. So when it comes to the sympathetic nervous system, once we activate it, right, once the hypothalamus decides, okay, that's it, we're under threat, whether it's for any of these reasons that you see, pain, anxiety, fear, whatever, your trauma, right, hypoglycemia, your blood sugar is too low. Once we activate the sympathetic nervous system, we're going to do it via the preganglionic and postganglionic neurons. But then we're also going to activate the adrenal gland, which is going to send epinephrine for the most part and some norepinephrine in the bloodstream. So we've got this kind of two-pronged response. So the hormones, as I mentioned, are longer acting and they can travel to all cells. They're going to hang around a bit longer. So what happens when you get a jump scare, right? Right? In that first moment, it's like, right? And so it activates the sympathetic nervous system. All of a sudden we're like, oh, do we have to run for our life? Do we have to fight to survive, right? What is going on? So in that very initial moment, it's those nerve signals to the effector organs. Your heart speeds up, you get a little jittery, your pupils are going to dilate, all these things are going to happen. But then because you also send these nerve signals to the adrenal medulla, which then releases epinephrine and norepinephrine, those hormones then go into your bloodstream and they stay around a little bit longer. So that is why after a jump scare, it can take several minutes for you to feel totally back to normal, right? Because it takes a while to get the hormones out of your bloodstream. So even though the initial trigger is gone, the nervous system signals are gone, but the endocrine system signals are still in place. So, in summary, fight or flight is getting your body ready for physical action. We're going to increase ventilation, right? We're going to increase breathing, blood flow. We're going to sweat. We're going to dilate our pupils, and we're going to put we're going to tamp down digestion and excretion. Now is not the time. It's going to be activated by the hypothalamus, often via the amygdala. We've got these two sets, a two neuron pathway. So we've got our preganglionic neurons. Cell bodies live in the spinal cord, thoracic or lumbar. They send their axons out to ganglia, which are located in the sympathetic chain or very close by. And then they're going to release acetylcholine in a synapse with the postganglionic neurons, which are sitting in the ganglia. And then those postganglionic neurons send their axons out to the effectors, and that's usually a really long path. And when they get there, they're going to use norepinephrine as the neurotransmitter. Then, lastly, remember that the sympathetic nervous system also signals the adrenal medulla, and then we have those weird postganglionic neurons called chromaffin cells that secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine into the bloodstream to act as hormones, and you get a more sustained response from that. All right, that's it for sympathetic nervous system.